Pam Hupp's attorneys entering a not guilty plea in Betsy Faria's killing. Hupp did not appear in court, waiving her appearance. Hupp is facing first-degree murder charges for the killing of Faria in 2011. Betsy Faria's husband, Russ, was convicted of the crime and served 3 years in prison before he was cleared and freed. 10 years later, it's Hupp now charged with Faria's death, who's already serving a life sentence without the chance of parole for the 2016 killing in O'Fallon of 33-year-old Louis Gumpenberger. She was originally the star witness in Betsy Faria's murder trial that saw her husband, Russ,
She was dying of cancer and trusted her best friend with everything. But 4 days after changing her life insurance, Betsy Faria was found stabbed 55 times. Her husband was blamed. But the truth and the real killer were hiding in plain sight. Framed by a friend, the holiday lights still twinkled in the window, casting warm reflections across the frost-glazed lawn of a modest brick home in Troy, Missouri. Inside, the house was quiet. Too quiet. It was the evening of December 27th, 2011, just 2 days after Christmas, when Russ Faria pushed open the front door and stepped into a nightmare. His wife, Betsy, wasn't answering her phone. He'd just returned from a night of game playing with friends, a regular routine for Tuesday nights. She'd been home, supposedly resting after chemotherapy, but something felt off. The lights were on. Her purse was on the kitchen counter. And then he saw her. Betsy was sprawled on the living room floor, still in her flannel pajama pants and a light sweater, her body cold. She'd been stabbed, not once, not twice, but over 50 times. There were deep, violent gashes, a knife protruding from her neck, and defensive wounds that suggested she fought for her life. Russ dropped to his knees. He screamed. Then he called 911, his voice breaking, pleading for help. But from the moment police arrived, things didn't add up, and to them, Russ seemed panicked, yes, but almost too panicked. He'd been out with friends all night, with phone records and receipts to prove it. Still, officers zeroed in on him immediately. They asked, "Why didn't you check her pulse? Why'd you wait to call 911? And most tellingly, were you two having problems?" Russ, stunned and grief-stricken, told them the truth. Betsy was sick. She had late-stage cancer, but they were solid. They had plans to go on a cruise, her last big hurrah. And earlier that evening, she'd even changed her life insurance beneficiary, a new update that seemed oddly convenient. But what investigators didn't focus on, not really, was who Betsy had changed the beneficiary to. Not Russ, not her daughters, but her friend, Pamela Pam Hupp. Pam Hupp was, to outsiders, Betsy's rock during chemo. She'd driven her to treatments, told friends how close they were. And on that particular day, December 27th, she was the last known person to see Betsy alive. She claimed she dropped Betsy off at home around 7 p.m., watched her go inside and left. She said they talked about God, talked about dying, talked about the insurance money, and how Pam would make sure Betsy's daughters were taken care of, but there was no written will, no agreement, just Pam's word. Despite Russ's ironclad alibi, complete with time-stamped photos, friends, testimonies and receipts from a gas station an hour away, police arrested him, and within days he was charged with the murder of his wife. Betsy's daughters, Leah and Mariah, were crushed. Their mother had just died. Their stepfather, who had loved her through the worst of her illness, was suddenly the accused. But something didn't sit right. They remembered Pam hovering, always inserting herself into plans, cutting off access, claiming Betsy wanted her to handle things. They remembered her saying things like, "Your mum didn't want you girls fighting over money." She trusted me more than anyone. Still, it would take years before the cracks in Pam Hupp's story began to show, and by then, another person would be dead. Russ Faria sat in the cold metal silence of a jail cell as 2012 crept in with snow and suspicion. He hadn't just lost his wife. He was being painted as a murderous monster, all because he'd come home to the aftermath. From day one, he said the same thing. "I didn't do this. I couldn't have." He had 4 alibi witnesses. He had time-stamped receipts. He had surveillance footage showing he wasn't even in town at the time of the murder, but the Lincoln County Sheriff's Department had already made up their minds. They believed Russ killed his wife in a jealous rage, after learning she'd changed her $150,000 life insurance policy from him to Pam Hupp just 4 days before the murder. They decided that was motive enough. And they dismissed Pam entirely. Pam Hupp was questioned, but only casually. She told investigators that Betsy had grown afraid of Russ, that Betsy told her in confidence that she feared for her life, that she didn't trust her daughters. To use the money responsibly, she painted herself as a saint. "I just want to honor Betsy's wishes. She wanted me to have that money to help her girls." But there was no documentation, no trust, no legal trail, just one signature. And Pam. In November 2013, Russ went to trial. The prosecution's theory was chilling in its imagination. They claimed Russ drove home from his game night, murdered Betsy in a fit of rage, staged the scene, then returned to his friends as if nothing happened. Never mind that all 4 friends swore under oath he never left. Never mind the phone GPS placed him miles away. Never mind the bloody slippers found in the closet, with no DNA on them, not even his. They used his grief against him, played the 911 tape to make him sound cold, brought up a failed polygraph test, even though it's inadmissible and unreliable. The judge allowed it, and disallowed any evidence suggesting Pam Hupp had motive. Russ was convicted, sentenced to life in prison without parole. He sat stunned in his orange jumpsuit, shackled hands trembling, and in the back of the courtroom, Pam Hupp smiled. She had the money, she had control, and for a moment it looked like she'd gotten away with everything, but Leah and Mariah, Betsy's daughters, couldn't accept it. They weren't legal experts, they weren't investigators, but they knew their mom, they knew Russ, and something deep in their bones whispered, "The real killer is still out there." They began speaking out, pushing prosecutors, asking questions, and eventually someone listened. The cracks began to show slowly at first, quiet rumbles behind a closed case. Russ's new legal team, led by Joel Schwartz, wasn't just appealing his conviction, they were digging deeper into Pam Hupp. And what they found was disturbing. They pulled phone records, bank statements, and finally, police interviews the jury never saw. Pam's story kept changing. In one version, she said she only stayed at Betsy's house for a minute after dropping her off. In another, she claimed she helped Betsy get comfortable, turned on the lights, maybe chatted a while. She claimed she'd never been in certain rooms of the house, but her cell phone pinged near Betsy's home long after she claimed to have left. She said Betsy gave her full control of the life insurance money, but couldn't explain why she waited weeks before telling anyone. When asked if she would turn the money over to Betsy's daughters, Pam paused and said, "No, that was never the plan." Joel Schwartz began pointing out the holes in her stories. Publicly, he gave interviews revealing what the original jury never heard. He filed appeals. He got the media involved, and then came the breakthrough. In 2015, the Missouri Court of Appeals overturned Russ Faria's conviction, citing prosecutorial misconduct and exclusion of vital evidence, namely, anything about Pam Hupp's motive or involvement. A second trial was ordered, this time without a jury, just a judge. Just the truth. In November 2015, Russ Faria stood once again in court, this time with everything on the table. Pam's shifting alibis, the life insurance switch, her cell phone ping data, the testimony of multiple witnesses painting her as manipulative, attention-hungry, and obsessed with inserting herself into Betsy's life. It was clear Russ didn't do it. He was acquitted. 4 years, 2 trials, a stolen life, finally, a sliver of justice. But Pam Hupp wasn't done. She had money. She had arrogance. And she was about to make a move so brazen, so cruel, it would change everything. Because when investigators started circling again in 2016, Pam did what no one expected. She lured a man to her home and killed him. By mid-2016, the walls were closing in around Pam Hupp. Russ Faria had been exonerated. Journalists and producers were calling her daily, and police in St. Charles County had quietly reopened the investigation into Betsy Faria's murder. This time with Pam squarely in the crosshairs. Then, on a hot August morning, a 911 call came in from Hupp's home. Pam's voice was frantic. She claimed she'd just killed a man in self-defense. The victim was Louis Gumpenberger, a 33-year-old man with mental and physical disabilities. He had suffered brain damage in a car crash years earlier and walked with a limp. Pam told police he'd approached her driveway with a knife, claiming to be sent by Russ Faria to collect Betsy's insurance money. She said he followed her inside, threatened her, and that she shot him 5 times with a revolver she kept by the door. But something was off. For starters, Louis didn't drive. He couldn't walk far, and he lived several miles away with his mother, who said he'd left the house only moments earlier with a woman offering a ride and $1,000 to appear on Dateline. Police searched Pam's home. They found a notepad with a script written in Pam's handwriting, with lines like, "Get Russ's money," "Threaten Pam," "Say Betsy's name." They found $900 in cash, a pair of slippers, a fake Dateline press badge, and surveillance footage. Showed Pam cruising poor neighborhoods, approaching random men, trying to find someone to play a part in a staged robbery. One that she would use to frame Russ. Again. Except this time, she pulled the trigger for real. The plan had backfired catastrophically, and it took police only days to piece it together. Pam Hupp was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. She entered an Alford plea, admitting the evidence would convict her, while not technically admitting guilt, to avoid the death penalty. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole. But it didn't end there. The public pressure exploded. The media attention forced officials in Lincoln County to re-examine Betsy Faria's case once more, only this time as a murder by Pam Hupp. In 2021, after a decade of lies, manipulation, and another dead body, Pam Hupp was finally charged with the murder of Betsy Faria. It had been 10 years since Betsy Faria's blood stained the carpet of her small Missouri home. 10 years since her daughters, Leah and Mariah, clung to each other at her funeral, their grief hijacked by suspicion, confusion, and lies. But now, finally, the truth had a name: Pam Hupp. The arrest came in July 2021, nearly a decade after Betsy's murder. The prosecutor stood behind a podium, voice steady, face firm, and said the words so many had waited for: Pamela Hupp is charged with the premeditated murder of Elizabeth Betsy Faria. The charges included first-degree murder and armed criminal action. She had manipulated her way into Betsy's life, seized control over her cancer treatments, ensured she was alone that night, stabbed her 55 times, then framed her husband. Pam pleaded not guilty, but this time no one believed her. The public had watched too long, seen her lies morph from subtle to savage, seen a disabled man gunned down, seen Russ exonerated, humiliated, then vindicated, seen 2 girls lose their mother, only to fight the woman who wore her face like a friend. Leah and Mariah, now grown, never stopped pushing for justice. They gave interviews, met with prosecutors, testified to Pam's control over their mother. In her final weeks, they recalled being cut out, shut down, and lied to, all by someone who claimed she was doing it for them. In one emotional interview, Mariah said, "She used my mom's illness to isolate her. Then she used her death to steal everything. But the one thing she didn't get away with was hiding who she really was." Pam Hupp remains in prison, charged with 2 murders and suspected in more. Her trial for Betsy's death is pending. Russ. Faria was awarded a civil settlement for wrongful conviction, but no money, no courtroom win could bring Betsy back. Betsy Faria was more than a victim. She was a mother, a friend, a fighter. She loved crafts, dancing, wine with friends. She had hoped for just one more cruise, one more sunset, before cancer claimed her. Instead, she was betrayed by someone she trusted with her final wishes. And the only reason her story was rewritten is because of two daughters who never gave up. From betrayal to courtroom redemption, from family annihilation. To Truth Reclaimed, this case stands as a reminder. Even in the face of the perfect lie, truth has a way of clawing its way out.